Hello, I am Ashley Gonzalez. I'm the newsletter editor for San Francisco International Arts Festival, and I'm here with performance artist David Brandstätter, and we are going to talk about his upcoming performance of HEIT in June. So David, please introduce yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
I'm David Brandstätter. I'm from Germany, living in France, working between Berlin and Normandy, France, most of the time. Together with my partner Malgren, we run a company called Shifts Art and Movement. We've been working mainly in Europe, but also a lot in Asia and sometimes in Latin America for about under the name Shifts since 2007. We have a lot of different works that we are interested in. In general, the name Shift is kind of program. So we are shifting from different contexts of work, different subject matters, different styles, different genres. And we like to work also in intern multidisciplinary combinations and work more and more on transdisciplinary approaches as well. So right now we work a lot with architects. We work in social centers as much as in stages, and we are interested in creating spaces where people can meet and exchange and learn from each other.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Freiheit? And I was reading that you take a lot of your performances from personal experiences. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so basically what happened to me was that at one moment I realized that I used the word freedom a lot. And without really knowing what was missing, I felt I was lacking freedom. But I couldn't really find out what made me feel so unfree. And so I started to research a little bit into the term, and it was also a time where I felt like I have to take responsibility in life. My father had just passed away after 4 years of coma, which has been very painful. So this passing away was somehow like a relief to me. And at the same time, it asked me the question to deal with freedom, because in a way, I escaped my parental control once and for all, at least from my father's side. So yeah, I then asked myself, what does it mean to be free? What is freedom as a word? And was reading philosophers, doing physical experiences with my body, doing behavioral experiences, crossing boundaries for a while, escaping the norms, and it was a working process, like for about 2 years, like figuring out what freedom meant for me. And it's not a fixed question, like it's not a resolved question. In the end, for me, freedom is an act of balancing. And in my performance, I do that. I do balance on porcelain cups. It's like souffle cups that you would usually put in the oven with some egg and spices in. But I move them in space while I balance on them. And during this time, you will hear reflections of mine based either on personal experiences, reflections about personal experiences that I relate to freedom, philosophical content, but also contextual material that I have to say right now is super challenging to update, because the latest developments, it has not been performed since COVID happened, the piece. And COVID has already been a huge prism on freedom, very different framing about, people fight for freedom to I don't know, for example, not wear a mask, or our freedom has been cut in so many more severe ways anyway than masking. But then in the end, we also have the freedom to be responsible now that in Europe, for example, sanctions are more and more released. Like, we can go shopping without a mask, but I still put a mask on in the supermarket. I got used to it also somehow. So yeah, in this COVID time, freedom has been greatly an issue, and then now we are in war. So yeah, in the war, people are fighting for freedom and dying for freedom, and it's like the label of freedom that I think is a trademark for many wars to be fought. And they could, I mean, they could say that country sovereignty would be maybe a little bit more precise, but still it's easier to sell freedom than a country's sovereignty. So there's also a point that freedom is something that is sold to us in so many ways. Like the advertising industry is promising a lot of freedom if we use the specific products that make us more free, because I don't know what. Yeah, so it's a critical relationship that I have to this word. For me, it's a space holder word. It's a word that takes a lot of space, and only by defining what it means at each particular time we use it, we can actually approach it even better.
When you create, would you say that, I know you're mentioning a lot about your personal experiences and, what is freedom to you, because you were feeling unfree. When you create, like you created this performance, would you say you created it to understand yourself, or would you say you created it for others to understand you?
I think it's all stages. I think it went through all of these stages. I think in the beginning, of course, as the subject came to me as a solo meta, it's been always treated through the lens of performativity, having to do something with the stuff that I discover. But the way to make choices and to find the form of the solo has been taking times. And I think the form it has now was probably the one that communicated more to the outside than it would be reflecting me, or I show less of myself in these versions and in previous versions that I've tried. But I have the feeling that it's more exhaustive and it gives more space to the audience to have their own reflections on the subject at the same time. So in a way, I invite the audience for an inner dialogue, going through my research and my discoveries and bits and parts of my life and my experience, in order to have an internal dialogue with themselves and their ideas about freedom and their reflections.
If you could work with any artist, anyone that influences you or inspires you, who would that be?
If David Graeber was still alive and he's not an artist, I would have loved to meet him, for example. I'm really in the transdisciplinary thing. I think artists, I appreciate the work of so many artists, but I would be more right now on figuring out how art can move things outside its own realm as well. Bruno Latour, Bernard Stiegler. He's a philosopher from France. Yeah, philosophers, activists, historians, stuff like that. And try to find a way to work on their subjects. Trying to find a way to work in their field, in their subject range. Mm-hmm. Trying to figure out like what would be intuitive response, artistic response within their discourse. Not adding any intelligent thing, but like just ping pong. Yeah, that would be interesting for me.
So for this performance in June, you're going to be working with Michelle Jacques. Can you tell me more about that? This will be different from what you've done before, and she's going to be doing the music and all that. So can you tell me like your ideas for this next performance and all that?
So I think it's the third time that I have a guest when I perform Freiheit. It started being invited to Tunis, and just a few years after the revolution there, I was invited for a dance festival in Tunis, and I thought I can't come with the subject of freedom, tell my European, especially German philosophical reflections to an audience that has been past the revolution just recently. So I was asking the festival organizers if they would be interested in organizing a dialogue with a local artist or with a local person. And I got into contact with Henda Shenawi, which is a journalist and women's rights activists in Tunisia. And that was the first time we shared the stage on Freiheit. Basically, what happens is I have 50 minutes of text, more or less, that I sent in advance to my collaborators, and they contribute with their thoughts on it. We may replace some of my text with theirs. And in Henda's case, it was just speech. But then in Karachi in Pakistan, I was also collaborating with Darvesh, which was a heavy metal dervish folk band kind of thing, somewhere between world music and heavy metal. And they have, for the first time, transformed the texts into songs, some of them, and others into recitals. So it was a mix between metal songs and traditional recitation. Michelle is in the gospel, soul, and blues field, and I've only met her so far by Skype and by phone, but she has my texts right now, and we have found some places where her songs could fit in. I don't know the songs yet. I'm curious. I'm looking forward for our meeting to see how things go together. But the idea is that, like, based on the dramaturgy of the texts and what's going on stage, that we find moments for these interactions to shine, and also to see if we can kind of a bit bounce back and forth with all of these ideas that we have. And she's also definitely a freedom motivated person and an activist, so she must have her standpoint on this subject.
What are you working on right now, and what's next for you after this June performance, or maybe even before the June performance? I mean, we still have April, May.
Right now, there's several projects we are working on. We are working on a project together with a small town next to Le Havre to emphasize on their development projects and invite the citizens and local people to meet each other around the subjects that are related to these projects. So we just did a kind of a walkway, a choreographic walkway, where we also planted seeds in order to mark the creation of a new nature walkway path. Something very simple, but we will also move on with them until the creation of their local theater. So it goes from a walkway path to a sea education station. Actually, it's a fish breeding station, but it's not a commercial breeding station. It's more for educational purposes and research. So it's from yeah. So we accompany their project a little bit, and then move towards the place where the theater will be standing and have a pre-mounted theater before the real one is there. So that's the project with them. And then we are preparing a big project for in 2 years of time, probably, where we will look at the first 10 years of our work and kind of create a meta piece out of the discoveries we pull out of these first 10 years of work, including the repertory, but also the rehearsal processes, the questions, the artistic development, but also the feedback of people, the experiences and reflections that come from the touring. Yeah, basically the time that made us the company we are now. And we look back at that and create a huge 6-hour work out of this content. So
you had mentioned the feedback of people being incorporated, and when you're reflecting on the 10 years, do you have any memorable feedback? Do you have any responses to your work that you like, that have stuck with you?
Yes, well, Freiheit always has some enthusiastic feedback, but like maybe for Freiheit, the one that I like the most and sometimes reappears is I felt so much connected because I have had so many very similar thoughts, something like that. People not necessarily have to learn anything, but if they can rediscover themselves and then feel therefore close to the work, it makes me feel close to them as well.